I want to let y'all in on a little secret about God's power. You hear talk about God's power, walking in God's power, feeling God's power, experiencing God's power. So how do you become, live and walk in God's power? Understand that God is another word for power, but also to really glean and get the power from it, you have to use God like a verb, not a noun, not just a person, but a verb. Are you able to God? Are you able to preside? Are you able to rule? Are you able to manage with your power? Is your power something of a lesser God that seeks to control others, or of a greater God, a greater level of God? This is why throughout the Bible you have designations between God, the Lord God, and the Most High God. Those are different levels of God. Just like you could say they're different deific masks. But if you want to make it something deeper than the deific mask, it's more so another aspect of the multifaceted responsibility that is God. So while you can't see everywhere, being omnipresent, while you can't be everywhere, you can be over what you're over. So if you have a company or organization or even a family household, just being present and aware of everyone in your household's needs and their cares and their concerns, this is a form of omnipresence. So when you do that effectively to the nourishment and embodying of those around you, to the the embetterment, the bettering of those around you. I want to say edifying is a better word. For the edifying of those around you, this is how you God. So that's God as a verb. Another thing is omniscience. Sure, you don't know everything. I don't know everything, but know as much as you can about what you know. Continuing to learn has a form of omniscience to it, a feeling to it, to be well-rounded in the subject, to be expansive in your intelligence. And once you learn enough things, you become better at learning. Being good at learning is even more important sometimes than what you learn, because if you're good at learning, you will know how to chew the meat, spit out the bones. You can be looking at disinformation and still get true information out of disinformation if you know how to learn. Learning takes training. That's like a muscle too. If you stop learning, you'll forget how to learn. You won't learn as easily because it's a muscle. It's like a muscle. You weaken it, you can forget things easy. It's much harder to retain information. It's much harder to relate information, right? Because it's harder to understand information because one may not be well exercised in assimilating information. So their level of God would be low. It would be of a lesser God. Now, make the distinction that there is a difference between the most high and the most low. So the most low doesn't consider any attributes or qualities, but don't assign the most low to a persona as you would the most high. We're talking about God not as a person, but God as levels and degrees of universal power and its expression. So the most low God is going to be dealing with the least amount of power, since God is power. So is the most high God the most high form of power, and then there's the most low God, the most low form of power. Now, we're not saying that there's different gods. That's not what I'm communicating here. But there's different levels that you can express your power on. If you're living hell and you're in hell, because yes, you don't have to die in order to go to hell. You can be in hell while you're alive. And things that are associated with hell, you understand, mythologically speaking, they pertain to the most low. So you have the dark side, you have the minuses, you have the lesser plane, the darker plane, the slash of opposites is what you have in the realm of the most low. And then Midgard or Midgard is your 3D experience on Earth. being able to use enough God powers just to satiate your physical appetites. This is dealing with the senses, dealing with the 3D construct, dealing with us being in our flesh. That's not the most low God, although they teach it that way for the purposes of subjection to those who don't know any better spiritually. They become preyed on by predatory shepherds, etc., who will put their form of God being on earth, their level of God, as the most low, but hell is lower than earth, so to speak. So the most low God is not to be associated with the earth. You understand? So this is where you have these battles with sin and battles with right and wrong, along anything aside from the general sense of care is not as necessary, not to make light of any commandments or any scriptures that were ever written. But what I'm saying is, if your aim is not to harm yourself or others, you're basically fulfilling the law. If your aim is to love yourself and love others, you're fulfilling the entire law. You're fulfilling every single commandment if this is your dominant creed. If your dominant creed is to embody love in all circumstances as much as possible, guided by wisdom, you are operating in the full power of God. Whether or not you can work a miracle, you're still working in the full power of God. Whether you can live for 1,000 years or not, you're still living in the full power of God. You're still being the authentic representation of the Most High. Yes, you. Even if you don't call on the name of God, you can still walk in the power of God and receive the benefits from God. Don't be tricked by religion. Don't let religions cause you to void out your own common sense. Your common sense says if you treat people better, life will be better. But if there's those who don't deserve your better treatment, better to avoid them than to mistreat them. This is common sense. You don't need to be religious to understand this. It just takes common sense and experience, trial and error, and learning from your mistakes, learning from other people's mistakes, even more importantly, because remember, wisdom is far more important than experience. Better to be a person who knows what fire is like and never have been burnt by it than to be a burn victim who voluntarily sacrifices themselves into the fire just to let somebody else know how hot the fire is. Don't fall into that trap, because spiritually these things can happen when people are put under a construct that is governed by lesser degrees of God that are pertaining more to the subjugation of human beings on the earth. And what you do is you make spiritual slaves that way. And you start turning people into merchandise, and you use prophecy to produce product instead of using your product prophetically. Super T Sigma, Sigma programming. Stay protected, and most importantly, perpetually resurrected. Peace.